Police Minister Bheki Cele delivered the crime statistics in South Africa on Friday. He announced that between April and June, over 6,400 people were murdered in the country, with over 40% of those being killed by gun-related violence. What can we attribute this alarming high number of gun murders to? And are our gun laws not tightened enough? Or is this another example of inadequate policing in our communities? Executive Director for the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo-Kupeta, weighs in. Annah, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Now, the police minister released statistics on Friday, and we are seeing more and more murders being committed, especially when it comes to gun violence. What do you think is the biggest attributor of this in the country?
Thank you, Katleho. We can attribute it to perhaps the need to tighten our gun laws in the country. We can attribute it to perhaps poor policing, but the problem is much bigger than that. And we really need to locate this violence, the increase, into the larger violence architecture in the country. These are violent crimes. These are crimes that really are the most accurate. The meta statistics are the most accurate in the country compared to other crimes. So this should be alarming to us. So when we locate it within the larger violence architecture, South Africa is a violent society, and this is shown in the violent crimes that are in the increase in the country. And we should really then be looking at multiple strategies to address this issue. One of the strategies is looking at the normalization of violence in the country that attributes largely to these violent crimes being on the increase. We need to address the normalization of this violence in the country. We need to probe into why we are so violent, address some of the root causes, the key drivers of violence in the country. We see violence manifesting in various forms. SGBV, it's manifesting in murders, killings in the country. I mean, just over the weekend, we saw the murder of one of the leaders from Abahlali Basemtondolo being gunned down, being shot in his own home. This is a murder case. This is a killing that is worrying in the country. So we really need to go back to the drawing board to really probe the root causes, the key drivers of this violence in the country, if we are to really start from the bottom in addressing violence and even the murders in the country. We need to start there. The issues of policing, the issues of tightening gun controls are more asymptomatic, so we really need to probe the root causes before we can even address some of the symptoms of this violence in the country and begin to look at issues like tightening gun controls, even dealing with increasing police visibility in communities. However, if we only deal with these issues from this symptom perspective, we are still missing the point. We're still going to see violence coming up in the country. We are still going to keep on coming back here, being alarmed at the high levels of murders, killings, violent crime in South Africa.
Speaking of the controls, I mean, South Africa already has relatively strict firearms control legislation, and the Firearms Control Act of 2004 obviously replaced that of 1968, which permitted relatively widespread access to legal firearms. So where are we seeing this access coming from? Where are all these guns that are infiltrated within our societies coming from?
There is a lot of proliferation of illicit guns in communities, in society. It is easy to get an unlicensed firearm on the street. It is easy to get it via the back door. So our gun laws are not really the problem because there is still this accessibility of unlicensed firearms, and these are what are used in most instances in criminality and in the crimes that are recorded in the country. Take, for instance, some of the matters that we've seen over the past few months, the killings in taverns, for instance. These are unlicensed guns. So this proliferation is also problematic, and we need to keep this. So tightening gun laws alone will not really help us in solving the proliferation of unlicensed firearms in the country, in the homes, in the streets, in communities in South Africa. So tighter gun laws are well and good, but there is a need to actually start doing some form of seizure of these unlicensed firearms, and even perhaps doing what we've done previously, providing an amnesty for members of the public to bring forward some of the guns, some of the unlicensed firearms that they have in their possession. This will, as a strategy, contribute to perhaps starting to control and decrease the number of firearms that are in communities, in society, in the homes of many South Africans and other nationals in the country. However, this alone cannot work as a strategy. We also need to ensure that we leverage policing visibility of police in communities towards ensuring that these guns are taken away when they are found in possession of people. But we also ensure that those who are actually on either end of the spectrum actually face the might of the law, are held accountable, are arrested. So this proliferation that we are speaking about really is criminality, and it is unlawful. So unless we start capping the flow of this from the consumer end and the supplier end, then we are still very much not addressing the much bigger problem that we are facing in the country.
Now, Anna, if you and I were to acquire a gun license, we'd be limited to a 9mm pistol. But we are seeing, and previous stats have shown, that most crimes are committed with AK-47s. And those are guns that are most probably coming from our defense force and also from our police services. Many of those guns are reported to have gone missing, and they are the biggest factor contributing towards these crimes committed. How do we curb that?
You are right, Katleho. Indeed, this is the criminality that I spoke about, the supplier and consumer end of the supply of unlicensed firearms or of those firearms that go missing, for instance. So these issues are all issues that we need to address. The criminality surrounding the supply and demand of these firearms and putting them in the hands of the general public. This is really concerning. How we kept this is beginning to even tighten the management, the maintenance of the arms in our state depots, for instance, making sure that there's accountability. Every firearm is accounted for, its movement, its maintenance, and its use is also accounted for, and records are being kept for use and even for movement of some of these firearms. Where they are reported missing, we really need better accountability in ensuring that they do not end in the wrong hands. But again, it speaks to the larger problem that I raised in the beginning, Katleho, that issues of violence in South Africa are quite high, and we really need to probe that. What makes violence so high in society? What compels people to be so bold to use AK-47s to commit crime, to even kill another person? I think that is really the root cause that we need to probe, even as we are dealing with some of the symptomatic problems and challenges that you have raised of guns going missing in national depots, guns going missing, guns being sold in the black market, on the streets in communities, etc. But we really need a multidisciplinary approach in addressing this issue if we really want to deal with the issue of violence, the criminality, crime, particularly violent crime in South Africa. It cannot be an either-or approach. It has to be a multi-pronged approach in addressing this issue and this problem.
You spoke earlier on about the normalization of violence. South Africa wasn't such a violent country. When did we take this turn? I mean, as the Center of Violence, have you maybe done studies to see what exactly led us to the point of being such a violent country?
There are many issues to it, and we have unpacked a number of root causes, key drivers of this violence. So violence really is embedded within our architecture. Our very democracy was acquired through violence during apartheid, for instance. So there hasn't been a clear breakaway from the violence that we experienced before democracy in South Africa. That has somehow continued into the democratic society that we now have. But also there is a lot of issues that have led to violence being our default setting in addressing issues. So we've never really found better ways of addressing issues, addressing problems and challenges in society. Violence is how we address our grievances. This is how we deal with conflict, how we deal with misunderstandings, how we deal with frustrations, for instance. From your protests service delivery protests, from your grievances that community members have, for instance. So violence has become more or less the language that leaders hear and respond to in order to come on board and address the grievances that community members have. And this further fuels the use of violence as a language to bring leadership, to bring accountability, and to bring a response to issues that community members and grievances that community members are facing. So this normalization of violence has been sort of running unchecked, joining the apartheid era South Africa and the democratic South Africa. So unless we deal with this normalization and how we have inadvertently used violence or condoned violence as a language that brings about the change we want to see in communities, then we will continue to see various manifestations of violence, either through murders, killings, sexual and gender-based violence, femicide, and many other forms of violent crime that we continue to see in South Africa. So we need to flip the narrative. We need to change the language. We need to respond to more peaceful ways of engaging and find more peaceful ways of responding to issues before they escalate to violence.
Most certainly we do, Anna. So in conclusion, I mean, violence cannot only be solved by civil society organizations and government. It truly starts within our communities and within our homes. What advice would you have for South Africans in what we do and say within our households that can contribute to curbing violence in the country?
It's important that we have all hands on deck, as you're saying, Katleho, from fathers, mothers, aunts, uncles, in communities, in families, speaking a different message, teaching our young ones about more peaceful ways of engaging, shunning and saying violence is not right, violence is not okay, this is not how you solve issues. But most importantly, it is important that leaders also come on board and respond to more peaceful ways of airing grievances by community members. It is also important that the police, the criminal justice system, also takes sterner measures ensuring that perpetrators of violence are brought to book, so that we start having deterrent measures. We start ensuring that violence does not become a go-to or a default setting or the way we respond to issues. So we really need to bring everyone on board, from your young men, women, leaders, business people, the corporate sector, the government departments, and even community members. Even as us as people, we really need to start saying different things, responding differently, and ensuring that this message is entrenched, so that we unlearn violent ways of doing things and begin to learn new ways, peaceful ways of engaging and interacting with one another.
All right, thank you for that, and thank you for your time, Anna. That's Executive Director at the Center for the Study of Violence and Reconciliation, Annah Moyo-Kupeta.